Welcome to the Mission Minded Podcast, and we are so excited you are tuning in with us today. I am your host, Rachel Miller, and I have the privilege of leading this podcast with my best friend and co-host, Bella Comfer. Our mission is to fulfill the Great Commission by bringing our listeners closer to Jesus through each conversation. So let's jump right in. Welcome back, everybody, to the Mission Minded Podcast. We are really excited to kick off our next series on the podcast. We're going to talk about science today. There's so many different routes that we could go with science, but I know that one of the main reasons we really wanted to dive into science is mainly because going to NNU, for me, I was a science major. I was more STEM-based. I know you weren't as much.
I have no science background whatsoever. I need to clarify that.
But that's okay.
I know what the mitochondria are. That's
powerhouse of the cell, baby. Yeah. But I know for me, it was something that really helped me grow in my faith.
Yeah.
Because, I grew up knowing the truth, but I didn't really have a good concrete, facts to be like, the Bible is so true because of like X, Y, and Z. And so I think throughout college, I really was able to dive deeper into my faith and have like solid answers for like the things that have occurred in the Bible, because I believe that the Bible is accurate and true and that it's not just a metaphor. Right. A lot of the things that happened, that they were accurate and historical. And so I feel like science is something that has been really laid on my heart because science and religion are actually so interrelated, and a lot of atheists or just people in the world want to try to separate those topics. And so I'm hoping that through this series, we can bring Jesus into science and realize how synonymous or parallel that they are.
Yeah. Well, and I think for me, it was something that like never even occurred to me. Like, I'm not really science brained, and that's not necessarily where my passions are. And so I was just like, yeah, God created the world in 7 days. The Bible said it must be true. And then coming to college and dating and being with my now husband Isaac, like
who is an engineer.
Who's an engineer, very science brain.
More sciencey than I am, I would argue.
Biggest nerd I know. But that's besides the point. He is very passionate about all of that, and I remember he was taking a science and Christian faith course at the university we went to, and I
think I took the same one.
Yeah, and it was
different
actually
years.
Yeah, different years. But it ended up being actually really discouraging for him because it was something that was so important to him, and a lot of professors, unfortunately, were saying how science didn't go hand in hand with the Bible, and he felt like he was being asked to choose. And so anyways, we like walked through all of that together. And so over the years, just being able to talk with someone who maybe is more passionate about that and finds more of Christ's character through that creation. I don't know. It opened my eyes to a whole new world of the science and Christian faith world. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's why Dr. Anstein, who is here with us today, has been somebody that has helped us know more about that, because he has such a deep background in the sciences, specifically chemistry, as his first love. But for me, a lot of the topics that we'll probably end up discussing, and many more, one will be like the flood and Noah's Ark. Like that was a big one for me with the hydroplate theory, that I was like, wow, like this is pretty concrete evidence to show that the Bible is historical and this is real.
Yeah.
And then also going into like the two of every kind on the ark, and like, I know there's so many words that we could say that for you are like, we don't say those words as far as like evolution, or like having two of every species from the ark be what we have on earth, and that's possible. And also you have talked a lot with me about DNA and
chirality.
Like homochirality. Oh man, that's a good one. But but to get into this whole topic about science, there's so many things that we can talk about, but we wanted to just do a good intro because obviously it's a very deep topic. And again, what do you mean by that? We want to ask, what do you mean by science? Because science is defined so many different ways by so many different people. And so we want to have a good working definition of that, so as we move forward, people are aware and know what we're talking about. So, Dr. Anstein, if you don't mind,
so tell us what science is.
What do you mean by science? This is going to be a fun ride for us because we've come through. Was it the 8th episode we just finished on? Is that our 8th?
Or ninth
episode? Yeah. And this has been kind of one of those waiting in the wings, right? For me, as a geeky scientist myself, I am so in love with two things, and you were so spot on. I love science and I love Jesus. And one of my passions is to see the integration of those two, because I think so artificially in our STEM-centric world that we say, well, you have to be an atheist to be a scientist. And we've already alluded a little bit about that, where I challenge that narrative. And as a scientist, as a true scientist who came through the secular universities, has multiple degrees in science, I think it's important to understand what science is and what it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So if we ask what is science, science, of course, is going to be the study of the world around me using my senses, right? And you could go back to Descartes. We could geek out on Bacon or Bacon, not like the mythical meat, but Bacon, who helped us understand how do we take the objectively true and with our eyes and discover truth. So when we look at science, I would challenge us in a STEM-centric world to not put science on the pedestal that it's artificially been propped up currently. Science is a very limited tool of discovery of truth using our five senses. There is a lot of knowledge, of wisdom, of truth outside of our five senses. So the narrative that I'm going to challenge this entire, however, and this could go on for years. I mean, there is so much.
It could be a while.
It has gone on for years.
It has gone on for years, right? There is so much to science. I want to get into things like the background radiation of the universe and the cosmological constants and the flood of Noah and entropy. And there's so many things that we could just flush out during this and weave it into what we've already gone through with our 9 episodes of a faith in Jesus. So a couple things that I want to set up front are definitions and making sure we're clear. You use the word evolution. It's important we understand what that means. We've used the word faith a lot, and we use science a lot. So in the context of an introduction, science being a tool through which I'm going to use my five senses to discover truth about the world around me, first and foremost, we need to realize that there are 2 realms of science. Okay, fortunately in science we use the same word science. But there's operational science and there's origin science. Okay, there's the now science and there's the then science, if you will. So operational science is concerned with how things operate currently. So I go into the lab, and if it's a chemical reaction, I can say sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid is exothermic, so it should give off heat. And I go in the lab, and sure enough, it's now science. I can do that. I can duplicate that. Then science, or historical science, called origin science, talks about the origin of a concept. Might be the concept of consciousness, might be the concept of sight, might be the concept of atmosphere, of the mind, right? We're trying to put together a puzzle or a picture of how that might have originated. That's what we call historical or origins science. So origin science, then science, is very different than now science or operational science. So in the realm of science, and we can't cross over these two. This is very important. I was actually on a debate on NBC several years ago.
What?
Well,
that's crazy.
I know it is crazy. With actually, it was
Boom,
Eugenie.
bomb drop.
I know it's such a funny thing. It was Eugenie Scott, and she was the national coordinator of the high school curriculum or something. She had some big title that was longer than all my names put together. And she would the mistake that she was making in the conversation, quote unquote, the hour-long debate, was going back and forth between operational and origin science. They're different realms. They're different realms of science. Because one is actually trying to put together a story based on evidence, or if there's eyewitness accounts, or a picture of that. And this is when we get into the hydroplate theory. I think it's one of the better stories of the origin science, and hopefully we'll have time to really flesh that out, because it's really powerful. But that's a story, right? There's competing stories on how the world originated, or how plate tectonics is one story, and we'll talk about them. But those are stories that try to put together a picture of the past. Okay, that's origins side of science.
Okay.
The operational side of science would be like engineering, right? What Isaac does, what I do, chemistry, physics, engineering, medicine.
What Tucker does too.
What Tucker does, mathematics, right? I mean, math is before science, but I have to have the laws, right? I have to have the laws of math before I can do science. So I need Tucker before I'm a scientist. So Tucker first, then me. And if you guys don't know who Tucker is, he's one of our friends who's a mathematician.
I had to give him a shout out.
Yeah, I get a shout out. Yeah, you got a shout out from this. Yeah, anyway. So with that, we oftentimes think of science in the crunchy world of physics and chemistry and engineering and astronomy, where we're putting people on the moon and we're coming up with penicillin and we're going to hopefully put someone on the Mars, and really, really fun, crunchy iPads and iPods and MP3s and all that stuff that we the technology that we have today. It's all predicated on operational science. On the other side of it, we have storytellers. That's origin science. Here's how we believe consciousness, the eyeball, or the human mind, or the atmosphere, or here's how we believe that to have come into existence. And so the real difficulty in science is flushing those two worlds out, those two paradigms out. Operational science, good. We can, like I said, it's crunchy. We can go in and we can duplicate it. Origin science, you can't really duplicate the origin of the human cell or originate the universe itself. You have to say, okay, what story best fits the data, my logic, and I would argue eyewitness account through Scripture, and we'll see that. Because in that realm, I can't test it. I can't take the origin of the eyeball into the lab and say, oh, well, here, yep, that's true. You have to believe a narrative, right? And so with operational science, with origin science, you have to separate those two out. And the best philosopher, the 19th century philosopher Karl Popper, did a really good job of saying, and he probably took it to the nth degree. He said and he used the word falsifiable. Okay, so we have to understand this word. It's very important. Falsifiable is like breakable. Okay, breakable does not mean broken. Breakable means it can be broken if what? You drop it, or right, if it falls down. Falsifiable does not mean false, but it means that I set up the ability for it to be false if it's false. So like my example that I use, sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid forms sodium chloride and water and heat, right? Exothermic, gives off heat, right? You right? That's a simple chemistry that you would remember from nursing camp. But what you can do with that, Rachel, is you can take that into the lab. And so let's see. Einstein said if I add sodium hydroxide, strong base, hydrochloric acid, strong acid, if I add those together, it's going to get hot. I think he's wrong. What can you do? You can falsify it. You can go into the lab. You can do it. Oh, he was right. Dang it. Einstein was right. You've falsified it in that it was correct, right? Again, it doesn't mean it's false. It means it could have been.
Yeah, you're giving it the option to be.
You got it. So what Karl Popper said is, if it's falsifiable, it's true science. Okay. Now, a lot of non-falsifiable scientists did like that, because he would say like that, all that origin stuff, that's not even science, but we use the same word for it. So we have to put it under the auspice of science. So, but it's important to know that so oftentimes in these conversations, people will use, and Eugenie Scott did this great, she'll use examples of crunchy, hard, falsifiable operational science, and then move right over into origin story science and say, because of this, then this is true, and la la. And in those days I was like, oh my word, you can't do that. But when you're on air and you're in a studio with lights and you're sweating and you don't have time to say, hold on, time out. You just crossed the two domains of. For us in our audience, we need to realize there's operational science and there's origin science. So not to confuse the two, even the very conversation of science needs to realize that when I use that word, if I am talking about the science over here in operational falsifiable science, that's different than when I'm talking about the world of evolution. So you use the word evolution, we have to ask ourselves, what do you mean by that? So in the concept of evolution, most evolution falls in which category do you think? Operational or origins?
Origins.
100%. So over here in origins, story science, we have to be really careful that we follow the data, not data for all of you listening out there. This is one of my pet peeves. If you're a scientist, you say data. If you're a non-scientist, you say data. So if you want to pretend that you're a scientist, say data. And by the way, just for fun, this was proven with, you guys ever watch Star Trek?
Oh my gosh, my dad watches that all the time. So I would watch it.
What's the cyborg's name on Star Trek?
Oh gosh, I don't know if
Spock.
I would.
Okay, that was the original Star Trek, but then the next generation,
the new one? Oh,
Star Trek Next Generation. Yeah, he's the robot. Who's the robot guy?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
No,
I don't watch the new.
his name's Data.
Oh my god.
That's his name. Anyway,
So
I was like, Star Trek finally came to my back and said, yes, it's pronounced Data. You don't call him Data, you call him Data, right? Right. So even this,
That's so funny.
even
Good to
even
know.
Trekkies
My
get
dad
that.
would nerd out on that. He'd be like,
So-
oh my gosh, yeah.
So anyway, it's data. So when you have this data, what are you going to say? Okay, how does that bring in together the best story? And I need to look at the data. I need to use logic and reason. And if there's eyewitnesses, I need to bring all that in and say, okay, that is a good story. So in the word evolution, right, all of a sudden it's a loaded word. I'm going to ask you, the very first thing I do in class is to say, okay, what do you mean by that? And people are like, what do you mean by no, I want to ask you, because I can give you 3 definitions of the word evolution.
Yeah.
Change over time, descent with modification, or from nothing to everything. Okay. So depending on your view, depending on what level of storytelling we're working on, we need to flesh out, okay, if we're over here in the origin side of science, okay, I'm fine. I'll work in that area with you. Let's put our falsifiable, let's put our operational science aside. Let's work in the realm of storytelling. Question is, which story is the best with the data? And that's where we got into DNA. It's where we get into homochirality. We get into so many topics when we're talking about the origin side. I was in my mind, I was thinking the then side of science back then, that we have to be really careful that now going forward, if I had a then story, making sure that story is consistent with what I should see today.
Are you saying basically that with origin science, it's technically not falsifiable because you can't test it?
Exactly.
Okay.
How are you going to test the Big Bang?
You can't.
You can't reproduce the Big Bang in a laboratory, right?
Yeah.
How can you reproduce even the origin of the eye from, as they believe, from photosensitive cells to the actual lens of the eye, right? There's a narrative that says that it went from that photosensitive cells to what we have today as the ocular eye with its rods and cones and its focusing, right? You're like, how are you going to test that? How are you going to take that into a biology lab or micro lab
and try to create an eyeball out of scratch or whatever? Okay.
What you're going to do is you're going to look back and go, okay, well, let's see. It looks like we had a giraffe. So where'd the giraffe come from? Well, the story goes like, well, the giraffe has a really long neck and the horse has a really short neck. So there must be there must be some level of movement of neck growth between a short neck and a long neck. And of course, this is what Darwin would have propagated in the mid-19th century, and that was really popular back in those days. And we're going to flesh some of that out, because to understand even what Darwin did with the origin of the species is massively important to realize the paradigm shift that we had in science in the mid-19th century. These are the kinds of things we have to flesh out. Okay. We have to understand the philosophy side of science, which we're going to do. Okay. But what I wanted to do with this podcast was hopefully whet people's appetite enough to say, okay, there's more to this than just, like you were saying, you're just like, well, God did it in, creation. It says he did it in 7 days, so he doesn't. Okay, I believe it. He says he did, and I believe it, which is awesome. I actually would take that over a bunch of mind rot in storytelling that says, here, believe this narrative with no data. Notice I said data, there meant data. This, that has no data to support it.
This is going to be how our conversations with Isaac and Tucker go, like the whole time. It's just going to be like...
I have a question.
That's awesome.
And I don't know if this is a dumb question, because I watch a lot of nature documentaries.
Yes.
I'm big into nature
Love nature documentaries.
And it's all what seems to be origin science, because it's talking about
storytelling.
25 billion years ago.
Yeah.
But if they don't have science to prove this, why are they saying it?
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. It's a great question. Here's the problem. We have no dating technique that accurately tells us the tick-tock of chronos, time, from the past, right? They're gonna champion out carbon-14 data myth. They're gonna say potassium argon dating. A lot of problems. So let me just give you an example. And this is one of the I said myth because carbon-14 dating can only date a sample that was once living.
Right.
Right. So it can only date like a tree or a feather or whatever. It can't date a rock.
Right.
Can't date a shell. Can't date a layer of sand.
Which is interesting because I feel like these whole arguments are based off of this rock is this many years old.
It's storytelling. My story. So here's the importance of understanding that I have a preconceived philosophy. I have a preconceived narrative. Therefore, my data is going to fit the story because of my presuppositions.
Okay, gotcha.
So I always one of the quips is, so the answer is evolution. Now, what's your question? You see what just happened? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what your question is. It has to fit in the answer is evolution.
Yeah.
The answer is evolution. Now ask your question. Well, what question am I going to ask? Because it has to fit in the paradigm, right? It doesn't matter what you're saying. My presuppositions are evolution is true. Now, let me go back to what I mean by evolution, because that is a loaded word. Am I talking change over time, descent with modification, or nothing to everything? Here's in our conversation, in our podcast, when we use, because this is what happens in science, when we use the word evolution in science as a scientist, I am not talking about change over time. I know of no scientists not one, who disagrees that there's change over time. So if you're going to use that thin layer or that thin definition of evolution, great, use it, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to use that word. I'm talking about cell phones. Cell phones have evolved. Primitive to complex, right?
Humans, obviously, like we get
Humans,
older.
we get older, we
We
get
change
taller,
every day.
right? Right. That whole concept of change over time is science. Good, great, use it. Use the word evolution. It's great use of the word. Descent with modification. Okay, now we're gonna. A lot of people jump off the train on that one. Why? Because when you look at the beautiful myth of the tree of life from our second page of our biology textbook, what we're not told is we have cat, rabbit, dog, monkey, man, and we have little pictures, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have all the We have all the data out here on the ends of my fingertips, right?
Uh-huh.
We don't have this.
The in between.
We don't have this. This is all imagination. Okay. And then we go further and we go further down to where life originated from a rock. Okay. So with that picture, if I believe that picture is true, like I said, the answer is evolution. Now, what's your question? Okay, where do these fit? Oh, I have to fit those in somewhere because the answer is evolution. Therefore, it had to have been part of this. So the whole concept of the second definition of descent with modification, we have problems with. In fact, in the 80s and 90s, we thought molecular phylogeny, big word, big mouthful there, was going to finally prove that the tree of life. And they were going to do it through sequencing of proteins and RNA and some DNA in those days. DNA today, but mostly the protein code. And as you go back through and say, okay, finally we're going to prove that the rabbit and the monkey had a common ancestor through molecular phylogeny. Turns out that we're actually closer to a rabbit in certain areas and chimps in other areas. And it never proved, so it just kind of fell off the radar. It was touted with lots of money behind it that this is going to finally prove the story, right, of the tree of life, and it didn't.
And what is the tree of life?
The tree of life is again, we have a common ancestor, so human, chimp, and monkey,
Right.
and then monkeys, and we're all mammals, and so we have the 5 strains of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus,
Right,
species, right?
okay.
So everything's related eventually
There's a lot to it.
yeah. Well, eventually we're all, we climbed.
We come from
Well,
the same
'cause
spot.
we climbed out of.
Are there specifically 5 classes? Is that why there's like the hand?
Well, I just use that as an example. It just
example,
happens to
okay.
be
I
5,
wasn't
and,
sure
and the
if there
5
was a
main.
specific-
Actually, I think there's 6 kingdoms, aren't there? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But yes,
So you're
but-
connecting the kingdoms. is what you're
Yes,
saying. Okay.
yes. So
Right.
all the kingdoms, and then they all eventually all the way down to, everything's related. We all one
came from one thing.
one reproducing cell mystically came out of the sludge, and everything came from that. Right. That's the narrative. So I'm not talking change over time because science doesn't. I'm not even really talking descent with modification because that's not really when we use the word. Sometimes we move into that definition. But what the story that we really need to tell and that we're going to tell when we use that word evolution is in the beginning there was nothing. Out of the nothingness something emerged, and the something over time became the human mind that can contemplate the nothingness. So that's what we're talking. It's a tall order.
That's a lot
Yeah.
of data.
That's a lot of. Thank you. Oh, bless you.
See what I did there?
Did you see what I'm with you. I'm with
I
you.
had to think for a second.
You had to think about it. Is it
You
data or
almost
data?
said it
Is it data? So that's a lot of data. So along the way, we've got a lot of pieces of the story to put together.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is where we get into polymerization, homochirality, information theory coming out of DNA, and this is why a number of scientists, like the intelligent design movement. One of my grandfathers in science was Philip Johnson, who was the grandfather of the intelligent design movement. I brought him up here to NNU. He was
Oh wow.
he was a Co-Berkeley guy, and he came up here and spoke when he was just and he's long passed, but he was the one that started the institute, a lot of the institutes of intelligent design because he realized that there's a lot of scientists out there thinking, this doesn't jive. We got a lot of problems with this story. We got a lot of good storytellers, but the data doesn't fit the
logic.
story. Yeah. And so they began to question the story because of the inconsistent data, right? Not the presuppositions, but just that the story wasn't complete. So that's what we're going to flush out along the way. So we've defined 2 things, and we'll end with the third one for setting our foundation.
Okay.
Science, we're going to ask, what do you mean by that? Are we talking falsifiable? Are we talking origin science? Are we talking operational science, right? Falsifiable or non-falsifiable? It's important. Which science realm are we in?
And origin is non-falsifiable.
Is non-falsifiable,
Okay.
correct. Right, that's storytelling.
Right.
The second is evolution. When we're going to use the word evolution, again, not change over time, descent with modification, nothing to everything. That's what we mean. That's the story that we need to tell, or we at least need to attempt to. And I'm going to show you that's why we have a lot of problems with it. And here's the third word that we have to define for us to have a rational conversation in science, right? Remember the law of identity?
Yeah.
We have to be using the same concepts in the same way in order for us to have this rational conversation. And that's the word faith.
Okay.
Faith is not a church word. It's not a religious word. It's a Greek word or a Latin word, fides in Latin, pistis in Greek. Pistis literally means truth or trust in the truthfulness of something or someone. It's not a religion concept. I trust in the truthfulness of something or someone. So if we're going to be I'm sitting in this chair right now. I have faith that the engineers that built this, who I've never met, who I hope did a good job, passed their engineering classes, knew the right diameter and everything of the metal to hold my weight against gravity, right? So I have trust in the truthfulness that this will hold my weight against gravity, right? That's not a religious concept. That's just faith is just trust in the truthfulness of something or someone. So here's what we need to realize. Science has an incredible amount of faith, trust in it. I have to trust in the truthfulness of the scientific method in order to discover truth about the operational or the origin side of science. So this myth that science versus faith, right? You hear that all the time. Science. And I had this question not that long ago in one of my Free for All Fridays. How can you be such a dedicated scientist and yet follow this Jesus guy, right? It's like, well, wait a minute. I have faith in science, but I also have faith in Jesus. I have trust in science and I have trust in Jesus. Just because I have trust in science doesn't negate my trust in Jesus. And my trust in Jesus, I'll tell you, actually encourages my trust in science. It doesn't, there's no war between these two. Science requires an incredible amount of faith. And if you don't believe me, the standard model of cosmology, which we can get into, which is beautiful, in the standard model of cosmology, 95% of the universe, if true, is dark matter, dark energy, meaning we can never see it. We can never experiment on it. We can never even understand it. It's 95% there. So we can only play with 5% of the known universe. So let me ask you, where's your faith? You have to have faith. You have to have trust that even my senses can play with the 5%. You also have to have incredible faith to believe that there's 95% that I can't even see.
That's
Wait a minute,
wild.
and you're making fun of me for believing in the Elohim that I can't see, and yet you as a scientist believe that 95% believe in science that says 95% of the universe is unknowable, is
unknowable, unseeable,
untestable.
Something Isaac tells me a lot is your knowledge. At least when talking about science, it's like a bell curve, and like when you don't know a lot, you think you know everything, and then the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. He tells me that after he listens to Albert Einstein lectures. So I assume it's true.
And we're gonna bring up so many cool guys like Einstein and Newton, and just because and one of my favorite Leibniz. There are so many of these giants that went before us that if we put the story back together, if we start afresh, right? Let's take nothing to everything off and then let's say, okay, if we just let the data speak, right? If we just let my logic look at the data and bring in the eyewitnesses, what story do we end up with at the end of the day? It is so exciting. It is life-changing. It is one of those that I can't wait to teach. In fact, you guys know I was down in Dallas. I got to teach to a group of over 800 classical Christian influencers.
Oh, wow.
And on hydroplay, let's rethink the way we teach Noah's flood, right? Because we're like a little ark and a little, no, that's completely wrong. It is such a powerful story. Again, all I'm saying is, we have two stories, plate tectonics and hydroplate. This will be an example. I'm going to ask you, there are two stories. And here's the important thing for our podcasters, or our listeners to know. When we have two competing worldviews, they don't in and of themselves intrinsically negate one another. So I could say in the beginning there was nothing. Out of the nothing, something emerged, and out of the something we became. I can say in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and out of that, here we are because we were made in his image, that we talked about in the last episode. Or I could say, in the beginning was a pink unicorn, and the unicorn said, let there be. Right. There's our three stories. We can kind of laugh at the latter one and say, okay, well, let's throw the pink unicorn off there. But in and of itself, those three don't negate one. The question is, which of them puts together a better story predicated on logic, reason, science,
Right.
eyewitnesses.
Exactly.
See,
Yeah.
and that's what I want to do, because I think those of us that have grown up, and like I said, I've gone through a lot of universities, right? And you guys know that I was from
Yeah.
Berkeley, #1 in chemistry for years. And going back and looking through, okay, what story was I told to believe, and why was I told to believe it? I was never said this is why to believe it. I was just said this is the story that all scientists believe.
Yeah.
So you just have to.
You just
Or,
have
like,
to. If you're a
it's just kinda
scientist, you
like the
believe this
norm.
story. And as I started looking at the story, I'm like, well, hold on. I'm an organic chemist, and that's inconsistent with homochirality and Le Chatelier's principle and polymerization and information theory coming out. I'm like, there's so many inconsistencies in the story, but you're asking me just to believe just
So many
because
question marks. Yeah.
you got too many question marks. I'm like, wait a minute, there's got to be a better story.
Yeah.
And that's why me as a scientist went, okay, well, I'm not going to, hold on, there's got to be a better story than this. And so as I began to study and teach and really challenge my own stories, I'm like, there's a much better story than this.
Oh, yeah.
And the cool thing is there's a lot of very high thinking scientists who are also like, yeah, way better story.
Yeah.
The story we've been told our whole life, yeah, it's got so many problems. Let's but here's the thing that you brought up. When you watch one of those documentaries, right? Oh, they're done so well.
Yeah.
Their graphics are amazing, right? Their storytelling's really polished and
Oh,
well
yeah.
done. So you're like,
They name the
wow,
animals.
right? The fuzzy, cute little animals, and you're like, this is
like
amazing.
Pilo and his mom. Or
Yeah, right. So you're like, how could this story be wrong? Because the graphics are so beautiful. And you're like, just one layer down. It's like, well, wait a minute. You just dropped 14 billion on me. You just dropped 130 million on me. I'm just going to say, okay, well, how'd you get the date? Where'd that come from? I'm going to ask, how did we get to that story?
Yeah.
Right. So in storytelling, we're going to go back to as we move into the realm of science, and just say, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why I think I like this topic, is because it's based off of logic and reason and like, I want to say fact, even though
Yeah.
granted with like origin science, like we can't like
Yeah.
definitively say
Yeah.
like, boom, this is. But again, it's like which argument is more logical and aligned with everything else that we know as of right now.
That's right.
To help me direct what I believe.
That's right.
And where I feel like a lot of other maybe just things that people talk about, or I don't know, maybe just topics in general, and maybe some people in science too, but we go so deeply on emotions.
Yeah.
And like we make up stories and we make them emotional because it gets
Yeah.
people. But it's like, okay, this is all emotion. This isn't based on any fact or reason. And so that's why I'm really excited to get into the sciences.
Well, and I'm gonna piggyback off that. I mean, look what we just went through in the last 4 or 5 years with how the science, right? We were told to trust the science. That's a whole other different realm. That's
Yeah.
not falsifiable, non-falsifiable. That's not operational origins. That's a philosophy,
Yeah.
right? There's an agenda behind the science,
Right.
and so you have to. Now we even have a third category of the science. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, what do you mean by
What
that?
do you mean by the science, right? Trust the science. I'm like, what science are we talking about? I'm supposed to be trusting, right?
Yeah.
And so that's even muddied the whole concept of science. And we have a lot of people out there that walk through COVID and are looking back going, man, we believed in a lot of things you guys told us to believe that we're seeing now that it probably wasn't really always cracked up to be. And so you were telling me to trust the science at the time, and now science has a bad rap.
Yeah.
And it's like, hold on, let's flesh all of that out. Remember, we do have operational science and we do have origin science. And so what I want to do is we're going to spend quite a bit of time in the origin storytelling side of science. I will try to bring in the falsifiable, the non-story side, when it's important for us to understand one of the pieces of the story. So we have to be careful how much we bring in when we're telling a story, because like I said, the story itself is not falsifiable.
Yeah.
But we can bring pieces of the falsifiable into the story and say, okay, well, this is what we can know. Therefore, our story looks like this because of what we can know. And that's where I would say the falsifiable science, the reason and the logic, eyewitnesses, that's going to help us put together, I think, a powerful story or narrative going forward.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I would encourage any listeners who maybe they're hearing this thinking like, kind of like what I was like, I don't care. The Bible says 7 days. It doesn't really impact my faith. Like, who cares? I found learning more about this not only impacts like how I think about biblical topics, like having to do with creation and broader science topics, but like it's also just a good way of thinking about any topic and being able to follow a train of thoughts having to do with logic and being able to I don't know, think about things in a logical way. And so anyways, just for lots of different aspects of life,
Give it
I
a
found
chance, we're
helpful.
trying to say.
Yeah, it really informs a lot of different ways of thinking, no matter the topic.
Mhm.
That's what I found.
Yeah. You said it perfectly. But I'm not exactly sure where we want to start. Like, do you have any place that you have like been thinking about where you want to start? Because I know there's so many topics we can go down, and I know
Yeah.
Hydroplate has been one
Yeah.
that I personally love.
Yeah.
And it points to obviously the Noah's Ark and a story in the Bible, because I want our science to bring us closer to the Lord and the biblical stories that a lot of people call metaphors or things that haven't occurred. And I want to bring those real logical, I guess, facts to biblical stories, so then it can help people think, wow, actually, maybe these stories are real and they're not just metaphor.
Yeah.
And this is historical, because
Yeah.
based off of our logic and reasoning and all these kind of evidence-based things, we can say this is the best story.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think, and we could talk about this off camera, but I think maybe we start with what's the really real and how do we know it? I mean, we've already kind of hit on that in a few podcasts when we dealt with ontology and things, because I think that as human, which we talked about in the last, the problem of evil podcast, when we're dealing with a flawed humanity, how much of the story can we put together with our limited knowledge of what we believe to be, visible, and like we're talking about with the 5% or 5% of the known universe. So I'm more than happy, and maybe off camera we'll talk about this, but I would just encourage the listeners to stay tuned. And as the science develops, I think it's important to understand, to go back to maybe the science of origins, maybe what was happening with creation, the days of creation itself, what happened with the fall, the Genesis 3, which gets more into theology than science, but there is some science in there with entropy. We can move into the flood. There's so many things in the book, the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis, that kind of gets thrown out there by certain theologians as myth that is historically accurate. It's scientific. There's some really exciting things in those 11 chapters that set a foundation and that paint a beautiful picture on why we have what we have today, why evil, why the restoration that we're going to see someday. It all comes together from everything that we've talked about in the first 9 podcasts to what we're going to talk about in the science. They're all married together in the beautiful, beautiful person of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's exciting to me, to see the integration, right, of the diversity of those topics.
Yeah. Well, then I feel like that might wrap up
Wraps
this
us up.
podcast, as far as like this was just a good introduction into science and what we're going to step into, and then we can talk off camera on kind of what we want to go down. But also, listeners, if you really want to talk about a certain topic in science, let us know, because we're here for you and we want to talk about things that you're interested in. And so if Hydroplate is what you really want to learn about, then we'll start there. But if you really want to learn about the creation and all of Genesis, and well, not all of it, but like the creation, the story and all of that, then we can start there. So I know there's lots of different ways we can go about it, but if you do have an opinion, then let us know. But if not, we'll just run with it. So awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening, and hopefully that gave you a really good understanding of kind of where we come from when we talk about science and evolution and the topics and words that we're going to be saying, so that you can understand as we go further. But keep listening and let us know what you think if you have a certain science topic you want to go into. But listen next time on our first science topic.